My ex-friend hijacked my garden for her wedding without asking, so I crashed it mid-ceremony, exposed her lies, then left her humiliated and single. You won't believe this story. The woman I hadn't spoken to in 5 years just tried to throw her dream wedding in my backyard without asking permission, thinking I'd be out of town. Little did she know, I was about to turn her perfect day into the most embarrassing moment of her life. You know that feeling when your entire world tilts sideways in a single moment? When something so outrageous happens that your brain actually struggles to process it? That's exactly what hit me on what should have been just another ordinary Tuesday morning, working from my home office like I had hundreds of times before. My name is Evelyn Moore, and at 31, I've built a comfortable life as a freelance architect with a specialty that some might call niche. I design classic garden estates for clients who appreciate the timeless elegance of Victorian-era landscaping. It's work that feeds my soul, probably because I get to spend my days thinking about beauty, symmetry, and the perfect marriage between architecture and nature. Maybe that's why, 3 years ago when I first laid eyes on my Victorian home, I knew instantly that I had to have it. The house itself is stunning. A restored 1890s beauty with original hardwood floors, bay windows, and enough period details to make any architecture lover weep with joy. But honestly, it was the grounds that sealed the deal. 2 full acres of what can only be described as gardening perfection, complete with ancient oak trees that must be at least a century old, perfectly manicured flower beds that bloom in carefully planned succession throughout the seasons, and a gazebo that looks like it was lifted straight from a Jane Austen novel. The previous owners had clearly been passionate gardeners, and I'd spent the last 3 years lovingly maintaining their vision while adding my own touches. This place isn't just where I live. It's my sanctuary, my creative workspace, and if I'm being completely honest, the thing I'm most proud of in my entire life. I've hosted exactly 3 dinner parties here, and each time, my guests spent the entire evening gushing about the grounds. My mother calls it Evelyn's fairy tale house, and she's not wrong. On summer evenings, when the light filters through the oak leaves and catches the climbing roses on the gazebo, the whole place looks magical. So you can imagine my confusion when, on this particular Tuesday morning, I glanced up from my computer screen to see 2 complete strangers wandering around my backyard like they owned the place. I was in the middle of reviewing blueprints for a client's rose garden, when movement outside my office window caught my attention. At first glance, I assumed they were some kind of service workers. Maybe the city had sent someone to check on something, or perhaps my neighbor had hired contractors who'd gotten confused about property lines. But as I watched more carefully, details began to register that didn't quite fit that explanation. The woman was tall and blonde, probably in her late 20s, wearing what looked like an expensive blazer and heels that were completely impractical for walking on grass. She was gesturing animatedly at my gazebo, pointing and moving her hands like she was explaining something important. Her companion was a middle-aged man in a button-down shirt, carrying a clipboard and taking what appeared to be detailed notes. Every few minutes he'd pull out a measuring tape and record distances between various features of my garden. My first instinct was pure homeowner protectiveness, march outside immediately and demand to know what the hell they thought they were doing on my property without permission. I was actually halfway out of my chair when something made me pause. Maybe it was the professional way they were conducting themselves, or the fact that they seemed so confident and purposeful. Whatever it was, some intuitive voice in my head whispered that there was more to this story than random trespassers, and I might learn more by observing than by confronting. So instead of charging outside like I wanted to, I grabbed my coffee mug and repositioned myself at the kitchen window, where I had a perfect view of the backyard but could remain hidden behind my curtains. What I witnessed over the next 20 minutes was both fascinating and increasingly alarming. These weren't casual visitors admiring my garden. They were conducting what could only be described as a professional site survey. The woman paced off distances from the house to various garden features, stopping to point at my prized rose bushes and making notes about their placement. She spent several minutes examining my antique wrought iron garden benches, actually testing their stability by putting her weight on them. The man measured the distance from my back door to the gazebo, then from the gazebo to the property line, writing down each measurement with the precision of someone planning something specific. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be evaluating my space with the eye of people who expected to use it. The woman kept gesturing toward different areas, as if she was explaining where various things would go. and the man nodded along like he was taking instructions. At one point she even pulled out what looked like fabric samples and held them up against the gazebo posts, tilting her head like she was considering color coordination. The whole scene felt surreal. Here were two complete strangers, conducting what was obviously some kind of planning session in my private backyard, acting as though they had every right to be there. The audacity was breathtaking, but also puzzling. Who does something like this, and what could they possibly be planning? After what felt like an eternity but was probably about 20 minutes, they finally packed up their materials and headed toward the front of my property. I watched from my living room window as they climbed into a silver sedan and drove away, still talking animatedly. The woman was gesturing with her hands even as they pulled out of my driveway. I forced myself to wait until their car had completely disappeared down my street before venturing outside to investigate. Walking through my garden, I felt like a detective searching for clues at a crime scene. Had they damaged anything? Left anything behind? What exactly had they been measuring and photographing? That's when I found it. Stuck in the latch of my garden gate, probably dropped during their hasty departure, was a business card that made my blood run cold. Enchanted Moments Wedding Planning. Making your dreams come true. Wedding planning. Someone was planning a wedding, in my backyard. Without my knowledge, without my permission, without even bothering to introduce themselves. My hands were actually shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card. The phone rang twice before a cheerful professional voice answered. Enchanted Moments, this is Lisa. How can I help make your special day perfect? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm and professional despite the fury building in my chest. Hi Lisa, I'm calling about a potential wedding venue. I believe someone from your company was just surveying a property on Maple Street? Oh yes, Lisa's enthusiasm was immediate and infectious. You must be asking about the Grant wedding. Isn't that location absolutely magical? I haven't seen it in person yet, but the photos Vanessa showed us were stunning. She has such exquisite taste in venues. That Victorian garden is like something out of a dream. The world stopped spinning. Vanessa Grant. That name hit me like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories I'd spent years trying to forget. Vanessa said the homeowner would be traveling in Europe during the wedding date, Lisa continued, oblivious to my shocked silence. So we wouldn't be disturbing anyone. It's so thoughtful of the owner to let her use such a beautiful space for her special day. Vanessa Grant. I knew that name all too well, and the knowledge of who was behind this invasion of my privacy made everything infinitely worse. Vanessa and I had been roommates in college, studying in the same architecture program. We'd been close friends, or so I thought, until our final year when I discovered she'd been systematically stealing my design ideas and presenting them as her own. The friendship ended explosively when she submitted my capstone project proposal as hers, forcing me to scramble to create an entirely new concept with just weeks to spare. After graduation, she'd gone into event planning while I pursued architecture. We'd had no contact for 5 years, and frankly, I'd been perfectly happy with that arrangement. Now here she was, apparently planning to use my property as her wedding venue while telling vendors I'd be conveniently absent. I'm sorry, I told Lisa, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my property, and I never gave permission for any wedding. The silence on the other end was deafening. I'm sorry, what? Miss Grant specifically said she had permission to use the venue. She even provided photographs and detailed measurements. She lied, I said flatly. I am the homeowner. I will be in town that weekend, and I absolutely did not consent to having a wedding in my backyard. Lisa's professional composure cracked. Oh my God, this is a disaster. The wedding is in 3 weeks. We've already ordered flowers, booked catering, sent invitations. Ms. Grant paid a substantial deposit. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I suggest you contact Ms. Grant immediately and find a new venue. And Lisa, you might want to verify property ownership before booking private residences in the future. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the business card and trying to process what had just happened. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my ideas this time. She'd tried to steal my actual home for her wedding day. The audacity was breathtaking, even for her. I spent the next few hours researching what I could do legally. A quick call to the local police non-emergency line confirmed that yes, this would constitute trespassing if anyone showed up for a wedding on my property without permission. The officer I spoke with suggested I document everything and call them if the wedding party actually appeared. But as I thought about it more, a different plan began forming in my mind. Vanessa had always been theatrical, always craved being the center of attention. She'd chosen my property not just because it was beautiful but because she wanted to show off. In college, she'd constantly tried to one-up everyone around her, especially me. This wedding stunt was just the latest example. If she wanted drama, I'd give her drama. Over the next week, I played the role of concerned citizen. I called Enchanted Moments back and spoke to their manager, explaining the situation and offering to cooperate with their investigation. It turned out Vanessa had provided fake references and had been extremely evasive about certain details. The company was now in full panic mode, trying to salvage the situation. I also reached out to my neighbors, particularly Mrs. Henderson next door, who was president of our neighborhood association. When I explained what was happening, she was appalled. That woman thinks she can just commandeer your property for her wedding? Over my dead body. Count on our full support, dear. The beauty of living in a close-knit neighborhood is that news travels fast. By the end of the week, everyone on our street knew about Vanessa's scheme. More importantly, they were all prepared to help me handle the situation when the time came. I also did some social media reconnaissance. Vanessa's Instagram was public, and it was a treasure trove of information. She'd been posting about her dream wedding at a private estate for months, sharing inspiration photos that included several shots of my actual garden. She'd even posted a photo of my gazebo with the caption, "Can't wait to say I do in this magical setting." The comments were full of friends and family gushing about how lucky she was to have found such a perfect venue. Her future mother-in-law had written, "So elegant. You have such wonderful taste, darling." Her maid of honor had commented, "This is going to be the wedding of the century." Reading those comments, I felt a mix of anger and something else, anticipation. These people had no idea they were being dragged into Vanessa's web of lies. They'd all received invitations with my address on them. They'd probably already booked hotels and requested time off work. And on the wedding day, they were going to discover that their bride was either delusional or a manipulative liar. 3 days before the scheduled wedding, Lisa from Enchanted Moments called me in tears. "Ms. Moore, I don't know what to do. Miss Grant is insisting the wedding is still happening at your property. She says there's been a misunderstanding and that you'll allow it once you meet her fiancé. She's refusing to cancel or find a new venue." "What about the vendors?" I asked. "Most of them are still scheduled to arrive Saturday morning. The florist, the caterer, the photographer. Ms. Grant has told them all that the venue change was just a rumor. She's even hired security to manage any disruptions." Security? Vanessa was really committing to this delusion. "Lisa, I want you to know that I don't blame you or your company for this situation. You were lied to. But I need you to understand that if anyone shows up on my property without permission, I will be calling the police. I understand completely. For what it's worth, we're considering legal action against Ms. Grant for fraud. This has been a nightmare for our reputation." Friday night, I barely slept. I kept imagining different scenarios for how the next day might unfold. Part of me wondered if Vanessa would come to her senses at the last minute and call everything off. But I knew her too well. She'd doubled down on too many lies to back out now. Her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. Perfect wedding weather, ironically. I'd taken the precaution of parking my car in my garage and keeping all my curtains drawn, maintaining the illusion that I might actually be out of town as Vanessa had claimed. At 8 a.m., the first vendor truck arrived. I watched from my upstairs window as a team of florists began unloading white roses and greenery. They worked efficiently, clearly having planned this setup carefully. Within an hour, my garden was being transformed into a wedding venue. The caterers arrived next, followed by a rental company with white chairs and an elaborate arch for the ceremony. I had to admit it was beautiful. Under different circumstances, like if I'd actually been asked, I might have been impressed by the vision. Around 10 a.m., I called the police. Officer Martinez, whom I'd spoken with earlier in the week, assured me they were ready to respond when needed. "Just give us the word, Ms. Moore. We'll handle this professionally." By noon, my backyard looked like something out of a magazine. The vendors had outdone themselves, creating an elegant ceremony space that showcased my garden perfectly. I felt a strange mix of admiration for their work and fury at the violation of my space. Guests began arriving around 1 o'clock. I watched from my bedroom window as cars filled my street and well-dressed people made their way to my backyard gate. They all looked so happy, so excited to witness what they believed would be a beautiful wedding. I almost felt guilty about what was coming. At 1:30, the wedding party arrived. Vanessa looked stunning in a flowing white gown, her blonde hair perfectly styled. Her bridesmaids were dressed in sage green, and the groomsmen looked sharp in their navy suits. The groom, a tall, handsome man I didn't recognize, seemed nervous but excited. I watched Vanessa survey her stolen venue with obvious satisfaction. She posed for photos by my rose bushes, her photographer capturing what she probably thought would be perfect memories. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was documenting her own crime. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock. At exactly 1:55, I made my phone call. "Officer Martinez, it's time." I waited until the music started and the processional began before making my entrance. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a simple but elegant navy dress that made it clear I belonged here, paired with the confidence that comes from being absolutely unquestionably in the right. I walked through my own front door and around to the backyard, where approximately 60 people were standing as Vanessa made her way down the aisle in my garden, toward the altar in my gazebo, for the wedding I'd never approved. The gasps started before I was even fully visible. I heard someone whisper, "Who is that woman?" Followed by confused murmuring as guests tried to figure out why a stranger was approaching the ceremony. I positioned myself at the back of the crowd and waited. Vanessa was about halfway down the aisle when she saw me. The look on her face was priceless. Pure shock followed immediately by panic. She actually stumbled, her carefully rehearsed grace disappearing as she realized her house of cards was collapsing. But she was Vanessa Grant, and she'd never back down from a challenge in her life. Instead of stopping, she continued walking, chin raised, as if my presence was just a minor inconvenience she could ignore. I let her reach the altar. I let the officiant begin his opening remarks. I let her think that maybe, somehow, she could brazen her way through this. Then I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there seems to be some confusion." The officiant stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward me. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "I'm Evelyn Moore," I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the silent garden. "And this is my home." The confusion was immediate and obvious. Guests began looking around, trying to process what they were hearing. I saw Vanessa's mother lean toward her husband with a worried expression. "I never gave permission for this wedding to take place on my property," I said, taking another step forward. "In fact, I specifically told the wedding planning company that this event was not authorized." Now the murmuring started in earnest. Someone called out, "Vanessa, what is she talking about?" Vanessa finally found her voice. "Evelyn, there's been a misunderstanding. We can work this out after the ceremony." "No," I said firmly. "There's no misunderstanding. You lied to your vendors, you lied to your guests, and you lied to your fiancée. You told everyone I'd be out of town when you knew perfectly well you'd never asked my permission to use my property." The groom stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. "Vanessa, is this true? You said you had permission to use this venue." Before Vanessa could answer, the sound of sirens filled the air. Right on cue, 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house. I'd timed this perfectly. "I've called the police because this constitutes trespassing," I announced to the crowd. "I'm going to need everyone to leave my property immediately." What followed was complete chaos. Guests were pulling out their phones, some recording the scene, others frantically calling family members. The wedding party stood frozen, unsure whether to flee or fight. Vendors began packing up their equipment as fast as they could. Officer Martinez approached with his partner, and I could see him trying not to smile. We'd discussed this scenario, and he knew exactly what was happening. "Ms. Moore," he said professionally, "we received your call about unauthorized use of your property?" "That's correct, officer. This wedding was organized without my knowledge or consent. I've asked everyone to leave, but they seem reluctant to comply." Vanessa finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. Evelyn, we were roommates in college. You're seriously going to ruin my wedding over some petty grudge?" "Petty grudge?" I turned to face her directly for the first time. "Vanessa, you tried to steal my home for your wedding. You lied to vendors, you lied to your guests, and you committed fraud. This isn't about college. This is about you thinking you can take whatever you want without consequences." The groom was staring at his bride with an expression I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. "Vanessa, please tell me this isn't what it looks like. Please tell me you didn't actually—" "David, I can explain. Did you or did you not have permission to use this property?" Officer Martinez interjected, his voice cutting through the hysteria. Vanessa looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, her shoulders sagged. "No," she whispered. "I didn't have permission." The admission sent a shockwave through the crowd. I heard someone gasp, "Oh my God, she's serious." Another voice said, "I can't believe this is happening." "Ma'am," Officer Martinez addressed Vanessa, "I'm going to need you to direct your guests to leave this property immediately. If anyone refuses to comply, they'll be cited for trespassing." What happened next was like watching a dam burst. Guests began streaming toward the exit, some angry, some embarrassed, most just confused. I heard fragments of conversation as they passed. "How could she do this? What kind of person lies about a wedding venue? That poor man." The vendors were professionals, and they worked quickly to dismantle what they'd spent hours creating. The florist approached me with an apologetic expression. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about this. We had no idea." "I know," I said kindly. "You were lied to. I don't blame you." Within 30 minutes my backyard was empty except for Vanessa, her fiancé David, and a few close family members. Vanessa was crying now, her perfect makeup ruined. Her dream wedding dress wrinkled from the stress. David stood apart from her, his hands shaking as he processed what had just happened. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Vanessa, how could you do this? How could you lie about something so fundamental?" "I thought it would work out," she sobbed. "The house was perfect, and I thought if everyone was already here she'd have to let us continue." "You thought you could force someone to host your wedding by ambushing them?" David's voice was getting stronger, angrier. "You thought you could manipulate and lie your way into your dream venue." I felt a stab of sympathy for him. Whatever Vanessa's flaws, he genuinely loved her enough to want to marry her. Now he was discovering that the woman he'd planned to spend his life with was capable of elaborate deception and manipulation. "David, please." Vanessa reached for him, but he stepped back. "I need to think about this. I need to think about what kind of person does something like this." He looked at me with an expression of profound embarrassment. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known—" "I know you didn't," I said gently. "You're not responsible for her choices." Vanessa's mother, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Vanessa Marie Grant, I am mortified. Absolutely mortified. How could you embarrass our family like this?" "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You lied to everyone, including your fiancé, to steal someone's property for your wedding. There's no excuse for that." As the last of the family members filed out, leaving just Vanessa and David, I heard her make one final attempt to salvage the situation. "David, we can fix this. We can find another venue, reschedule." He turned to look at her with an expression of such profound disappointment that even I felt uncomfortable witnessing it. "Vanessa, you lied to me about where we were getting married. You committed fraud. You were willing to let me unknowingly participate in a crime, rather than tell me the truth. How am I supposed to trust you with marriage when you couldn't trust me with this?" With that, he walked away, leaving Vanessa alone in my driveway in her wedding dress. She turned to me one last time, her face a mixture of rage and desperation. "Are you happy now? You've ruined my life." "I didn't ruin your life, Vanessa," I said calmly. "I protected my property and my rights. You ruined your own life when you decided to lie and steal instead of being honest with the people who loved you." After she left, I stood in my empty backyard, looking at the few decorations the vendors had missed in their hasty retreat. My garden looked exactly as it had that morning, but something felt different. The violation had been erased, but more than that, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. For years I'd carried the memory of Vanessa's betrayal in college like a small, persistent ache. I'd wondered if I'd overreacted, if I'd been too harsh in cutting her out of my life. Now I knew with absolute certainty that I'd been right about her character. Some people don't change, they just find new targets. Over the next few days, the story spread through my neighborhood and beyond. Mrs. Henderson called it the most exciting thing to happen on Maple Street in 30 years. Several neighbors brought me flowers and baked goods, expressing their admiration for how I'd handled the situation. I also received a surprising phone call from Lisa at Enchanted Moments. Ms. Moore, I wanted to thank you for how professionally you handled everything. We're pursuing legal action against MS Grant for fraud, and your cooperation has been invaluable. What happened with the vendors? I asked. Most of them are writing off their losses, but Ms. Grant is responsible for the full cost of services rendered. It's going to be expensive for her. Oh, and her fiancé called off the engagement officially yesterday. I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness at that news. Satisfaction because justice had been served. Sadness because a relationship had ended in such a painful way. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. David, Vanessa's former fiancé, stood on my front porch with a bouquet of flowers and an embarrassed expression. Ms. Moore, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to apologize again and to thank you. Thank me? For showing me who she really was before I married her. I know that wasn't your intention, but you saved me from making a terrible mistake. I invited him in for coffee and we talked for over an hour. He told me about other lies he'd discovered Vanessa had told during their relationship. Smaller deceptions that he'd overlooked or rationalized. The wedding debacle had opened his eyes to a pattern of behavior he'd been willfully blind to. I keep thinking about our future children, he said. What kind of example would she have set? What would she have taught them about honesty and respect for others? Before he left, he handed me an envelope. I know this might sound strange, but would you consider letting me hire you to design my future home? Whenever I do get married, for real this time, I want a garden that's half as beautiful as yours. That evening, I sat in my gazebo with a glass of wine, thinking about the strange turn my life had taken. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a quiet architect living peacefully in my beautiful home. Now I was apparently becoming known as the woman who'd stood up to a wedding crasher and inadvertently saved a man from a dishonest marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Ms. Moore. This is Sarah Chen from San Francisco Style magazine. We'd love to feature your home and the story of how you handled the unauthorized wedding situation in our next issue. Would you be interested in discussing this? I laughed out loud. Trust Vanessa to turn even her own humiliation into an opportunity for someone else. 6 months later, my phone rang with an opportunity I never could have imagined. Ms. Moore? This is Jennifer Walsh. My daughter saw the magazine article about your house, and we're wondering if you might be available to design a garden wedding venue. We'd like to hire you properly, with contracts and everything. It turned out that my small act of self-defense had launched an unexpected side business. Word had spread through social media and wedding planning circles about the architect who had the most beautiful backyard garden and the backbone to protect it. Couples were specifically seeking me out because they wanted someone who understood the importance of boundaries and proper procedures. Within a year, I'd designed 3 different garden venues and was booked solid for consultations. The irony wasn't lost on me that Vanessa's attempt to steal my space had actually helped me discover a lucrative new career direction. I never heard from Vanessa again directly, but mutual acquaintances occasionally shared updates. She'd moved to another city, apparently to escape the social fallout from the wedding disaster. Her event planning business had folded after several clients canceled their contracts. Last I heard, she was working as an assistant at someone else's firm, keeping a much lower profile. David did eventually commission me to design his future home, though he remained single for quite some time after the wedding debacle. I'm taking a break from trusting people too quickly, he told me with a wry smile. As for me, I learned something valuable about the power of saying no. For too many years, I'd been the type of person who avoided confrontation, who tried to keep the peace even when it cost me personally. Vanessa had counted on that tendency when she'd planned her scheme. She'd assumed that even if I found out, I'd be too polite or too conflict-averse to make a scene. But some violations are too significant to ignore, some boundaries too important to let slide. Standing up for myself that day didn't just protect my property, it protected my sense of self-worth and my right to make decisions about my own life. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to disappoint people who are counting on your compliance. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices rather than enabling their bad behavior. And sometimes, when someone tries to steal your dreams, the best revenge is simply refusing to let them succeed. Every evening now, when I sit in my gazebo with my coffee and watch the sunset paint my garden golden, I think about that chaotic Saturday when my peaceful life exploded into drama and then settled into something even better than before. My home is still my sanctuary, but now it's also a testament to the importance of protecting what matters to you. The garden has never looked more beautiful, and for the first time in years it feels completely unquestionably mine.